the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us today. It is November 28th, 2017, 8 o'clock in the morning here on the West Coast. We really appreciate you joining us, and we want to give a shout out and thank you to KEPW.org in Eugene, an FM station that's carrying our show. So we really do appreciate it. We do only have an hour, so I'm going to just jump right in. We have on the phone with us a personal friend of mine, but a really awesome role model and activist for people, Mimi Gurman, who is with No Nukes Northwest. And we're going to talk about how her activism has actually, I met her because she's engaged in like the larger issues of Fukushima. She runs a website called RadNet, where they list up radiation levels around the country. And also, that's where I met Matt Holstrunk, who does the radiation readings up in Corvallis. So she does a lot of things on a wider scale, but her focus in the last year has really come home, where they say activism is local, things matter, politics on a local level. So I've asked her to come onto the show to help us explain what she's doing locally, kind of as a way for us to see what happens when you get engaged on a local level. So thank you, Mimi, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and welcome back to your show.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So I know that when we first met, we were engaged really talking about radiation levels. Shutting down the Columbia Generating Station was our primary focus. And I think it was really what got you spurred was the super severe winters that we've endured here on the Northwest the last couple of years. And you really ramped up your efforts at a local level to help the people who are out on the streets, who are houseless, who do not have homes. So let me ask you about that. That's kind of an interesting thing, a transition. People, I notice, are not calling them homeless people. They're calling them houseless people. What's that difference? What's the nuance there?
The difference is that there's so many people out on the streets living, in tents, living under bridges, and living with their own communities, that they do have homes. They don't have houses. They don't have roofs. And so calling them homeless sort of is this sort of false notion that they're not at home. They're not in houses. And so I like to continue to push the issue that these people do not have houses. And so I and many others call people living on the streets houseless rather than homeless, because they have homes. Their homes are in the community that they're in on the streets. And it's a terrible way to live. And we need to get them houses. They're houseless.
Yeah, we do actually. I mean, it is a despicable state of affairs that we actually have people living in 26-room mansions and people living on the streets. For me, I find that completely, I mean, those places, it's outrageous. Um,
Right.
so,
Lonnie, I wanted to say one thing, and that is that in case, as some of your listeners know, I'm always going somewhere when I talk to you. And in case the Wi-Fi connection cuts out, it will only be cut out for a few minutes, and I'll keep checking back in, and I won't hang up. Just to let you know.
Okay. So you'll be on, so there might be a little in and out of where you're going. All right. Well, yes. I appreciate that. Well, look, why don't you tell the listeners about how this evolved and what you've been engaging in the last year and a half and how it affects, this is the interesting thing. Mimi has gotten engaged in working at the city council. Last year, I think I had her on where she was talking about getting services and goods to people during the winter, like getting places open where people wouldn't have to sleep out in the snow, getting them blankets, getting them jackets, bringing them food. How has that evolved, and what have you been up to in the last year since I think you were on talking about this last winter?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
We've been continuing to push for getting our city government ready for this winter, which is upon us. So we've been pushing every single week at City Council to give us the plans. What are their new plans? Let the public know what the new plans are, giving them directives that we need to know so that we can disperse the info with the help of the government. The community who is housed know where to take people for inclement weather. So, they're telling us that certain things have changed. We haven't really seen those changes. So I'm hoping that we have more shelters, which are not the answer, but they are an answer, especially for winter. And that they're really going to make a concerted effort to get people inside this winter. So, we'll see. But we're still pushing. I'm still delivering clothing. My neighborhood knows me, so they do clothing drives all the time. It's a constant effort to get more clothes, and they call me, and then I pick them up, and I go deliver them directly to the people. We need a lot of people doing that all the time, not just once a year.
Well, from a quick Google search, It says there's about 4,200 people homeless or houseless without homes, in Portland. Does that sound like an accurate?
Probably more like 7. It's probably way underestimated. We feel that there are more like 7,000 to 8,000 people, if not a little bit higher than that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That seems like a very low estimate because, especially when you think about that, Portland has a population of about 640,000 people. So,
right, and one of the things that just happened. This happened a week and a half ago. It's so frustrating even talking about it. So there was a complaint made by a jewelry store downtown first. And they made the complaint to the mayor that they need to close up because there are so many houseless people living around, surviving around that jewelry store that it's making it unsafe for customers to come in and for them to be open, and they're losing business. So they're gonna close down. And then what happened was, it's not Columbia Sportswear. I can't remember which one. It's another huge sportswear store, and they've made their headquarters very recently, like a few months ago, in Portland.
Cabela?
And they, no, it's not them, but I can't remember who it is. Anyway, they made a public announcement to the mayor, and it was big PR for them, that had they known that the houseless situation around their store, which is right downtown, was going to be so inundated with houseless people and aggressive houseless people scaring their employees, they would never have moved here. So what that did was that prompted the mayor, Ted Wheeler, to have a private meeting with business owners to discuss what they could do to alleviate the problem. Now, interestingly enough, just weeks before that happened, Chloe Eudaly and the rest of City Council, Chloe Eudaly is a city councilor, she and the rest, all 5 city councilors, decided that they would give more money to the police so that they could have more cops on the walking beat. And for those of you who aren't putting this picture together yet, what that means is 2 weeks before the store complained about the houseless, the city allowed more cops and more money to be used for the cops to walk the streets, which means to sweep up and or arrest people sleeping on the streets. So the response was, let's just get rid of the people. And I believe that if it was legal, and I honestly, at this point, I believe this. I believe, I'm passing a tent right now of people trying to deal with the rain. Terrible. Anyway, I believe that if it was allowable, if people were allowed to do what they wanted to do, governments, I mean, I believe that they would either lock up, for life, any houseless person they could and every houseless person they could, or they would recreate the oven and just get rid of them this way. So what they do instead, since that can't happen, because that's, clear genocide, is they just continue the sweeps. They allow more cops to walk the beat, to arrest and sweep up people and tell them they can't be there. And that's what Portland is doing right now.
What kind of services do they have to help the homeless, like change their living situation, like mental health services, housing programs, things like that could actually, drug rehabilitation, drug and alcohol. I mean, things that could actually help people who are, and a lot of people that are that find themselves houseless aren't exactly drug addicts and alcoholics or deadbeats. They're just people who have lost their jobs. They're like regular people who, in fact, my co-host Jerome Hebert was without a home for, I think, 6 weeks before his brother came and helped him out because his landlord, he had a house full of roommates. One of the roommates was really a horrible person, a new roommate, and the landlord all of a sudden said, "You're out." Right? So
right.
That kind of thing happens, and people get into this cycle, and if, thank goodness his brother was able to come and help him regain his footing, a lot of people don't have that, type of support system hanging out there. So they end up in the streets and making do, and it becomes... once you're without a home, it's not an easy place to get out of that situation again, because even if you have a job, it's difficult to bathe, it's difficult to find food, it's expensive. I mean, it is really not an easy way to live. So are they doing anything rather than just putting more cops on the beat to help these people?
Well, the biggest thing that they're doing is putting cops on the beat. So that's the big thing. And what we do have, we have some services here, but when you speak to the houseless people on the streets and talk to them about the services that they have, like there's one building that's downtown that's sort of a catch-all building. You can go there and pick up your Social Security check. It will go there for you. You can pick up, your food stamps. You can do, a lot of things. They even have a shower there. However, when you actually talk to people who have to use that building, they are afraid of that building. They hate that building. It's not the building. It's what goes on inside the building. And the building, it was one of the most fascinating conversations I had with anybody. It was in the middle of the snowstorms last year, and I was giving a ride to 2 houseless people who are a couple, and one was pregnant. And we were talking about the services, and this is how I found this out. So there's a line of people inside the building that just snakes through the whole building, and you have to wait there all day to get whatever service it is that you're waiting for. And what that means is if you miss the lunch line over at whatever church you manage to get your food at, if that's how you're getting your food outside, so you can't eat while you're there because you can't leave the line. So you're waiting there, and then if you're waiting for a shower, the lines are so long that you can miss all food all day long and wait in line and then still not get your shower. You can get to your, somebody in there who you're going to is some form of mental health case worker, right? You get to them and they don't even know who you are. Or they don't have the proper file because it didn't get to them. Or they forgot to send your last appointment notes to whoever that was supposed to go to. And in the meantime, the people who are in line needing those services have missed eating. They can't leave to go to the bathroom in the building because they'll lose their spot in these long lines. So then there's other people out on the street who could use those services if those services actually were real, and they won't go in because they have mental illness that does not, it's just, they don't want to be in these crowds. They can't handle it. Their PTSD will just act up. So they know better and they're not going to go. Then there are people who are with, deeper levels of mental illness on the street who can't know where to go, who don't know where to go. And so what we've done is we've started to pressure City Council to get entire therapy groups to go out to the streets, to mobilize on a city level of therapists, of drug support, of food stamps, getting people signed up on the streets for food stamps, all kinds of things like this to go to the people instead of making the people come to you, because that's just not working.
Do you guys have an Occupy Medical in Portland? I know here in Eugene we have an Occupy Medical group, nurses and healers and practitioners who get together like every Sunday. And I know that the household population really does rely on it. It's made a huge difference here.
We have people who are medics, who are, resident medics, and they come out, I see them very often for Antifa, protesting Nazis and things like that. But I don't think it's as mobilized as what you have in Eugene, and that's just so great that you do have that.
It is, actually, and it has made a huge, ironically, the people that I've made friends with, here in Eugene, many of them are houseless people because they're out there strumming a guitar, making it work, or, talking to people, and, they really are, it's really made a huge difference in their lives, and it does. And I think that this is really what we're talking about, is throwing a lifeline to people who are really on the edge and really have nowhere to go and can't see their way out of it. And like, I know one man here in Eugene who has no intention of ever going into an apartment, into a building. His PTSD is so severe, he sees that as freedom. It's his way of life. He can't imagine. After speaking with him, he sounds like a perfectly normal person, but after getting to know him and speaking with him and understanding his issues, there's a mental breakdown that's like he doesn't function like normal people. Yet he's able to, he struggles here in Eugene, and I think the struggle is internal, because he and I have had this talk, like, he's really grateful for Occupy Medical. The cops here, there has been a big push to make them stop rousing you while you're sleeping, which is one of the things that they do that is the most inhumane thing that I find for the houseless people. Is they come at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and rouse people out of their sleep and say, what's the difference between getting them up in the middle of the day or early in the morning? The difference is people are going to work in the middle of the morning. They don't want to see that. That's ugly. That's it.
Yeah.
This speaks to the humanity of who we are. People in our country right now are kind of shocked at what's gone on in the White House. But if we really bring it down to a local level, I've watched some of your videos with Mayor Wheeler just completely refusing to talk to people about any of this issue. They've got their program.
Well, what they do, Lonnie, is they do these backroom meetings, which is exactly what he did with the business people, saying, "Oh, look, you guys, we don't want you to leave. We don't want you to feel this way. And so because you have money and you pay taxes to the city, and we need you here to pretend that Portland is so great, we're going to cater to you by putting those police on those footbeats near your stores. And what that means is we're going to clean up the houseless." we're going to genocide them, or we're going to send them off to some other park. It's terrible.
Well, this is the interesting thing. There's never been a discussion about how the homeless, the houseless population are really the most exposed to the chemical and radioactive pollution in our environment. They,
Absolutely.
And it is really, and it does affect them. It affects their health. It affects their mental well-being. Dr. John Goffman proved that one of the first symptoms of radioactive contamination is schizophrenia. So is it any wonder that we have a lot of schizophrenic on the streets? Because they're constantly being rained on, they're exposed, they're sleeping near the dirt where the radioactivity accumulates. No one thinks about that, but it really is not a small issue of just allowing people to sleep in the streets unprotected. I mean, these are big medical issues that we end up paying for. I mean, if people want to get selfish about it, it really, beyond them, society ends up paying for it as these people get sick and go into the hospital and have no care. And, I mean, it's not like they live on the fringe. And ironically, I've thought about this, and I haven't actually ever pursued the study of what it actually costs to be on society on homeless for a person to live on the streets. But my guess is that it probably ends up costing less to allow them to live on the streets than to help them get off the street. Even if we pay for their medical care, even when they get sick, because really what really matters in this country is the profit motive. I mean, this is a pretty capitalistic society where the only thing that matters is profit.
Well, the other thing, too, is that if you house people, you're housing them in somebody's community. And whatever community that is, that community does not want the houseless in homes in their community.
That's true.
And so my take on it all is that if we could deconstruct the message of the houseless are,
a
terrible,
threat,
and they're going to bring our home prices, our housing prices down if they're in our community. We should completely deconstruct that and say, no, if we show the world that we are compassionate people, that will make people want to come and live in our neighborhood. And that's how I view it.
Yeah.
So let's have the houseless get housing in our neighborhoods.
I have to say I was stunned by that attitude. Must be, oh my gosh, it must be now about 8 or 9 years ago here. It was in 2006. I know the year because that was right before Obama became president. Our armory here, the armory in Eugene, closed down. It was after they had stopped sending people to Iraq, so they weren't training people anymore. But this one facility has like 3 kitchens and bathrooms. It can house up to 150 people. And they could it could house a good substantial amount of people on a daily basis. So me and one other person were working with talking to the city council to get the city council to turn that into a shelter so that people could stop sleeping at the edge of the river during the winter. It was really, to me, it seemed like a no-brainer. You know who stopped that the city council embraced the idea. They were grateful that somebody came up with it. Who stopped it were the homeowners in that area. They lobbied the city council and said, absolutely not. And that to me is a real shame. And ironically, in that very same neighborhood now, there's a Unitarian church that did get built. And I don't think that conversation is even, it's kind of like a non-plus conversation. There's no conversation about that anymore. So it's just a matter of, and I think there's a lot of shaming and guilt. People blame the houseless for their situation of living on the streets. There's a lot of guilt and misinterpretation of how a person ends up without a home in our country, without a place to call your own. There's a lot of people want to blame the victims. It's so ironic in our country where people we talk about being a self-reliant, self-responsible country, and yet the circumstances that drives people to be without a home for long periods of time are not entirely selfish, and it's not entirely the person's fault that they end up on the street. There's a lot of circumstances. And on a case-by-case basis, I think one of the things you see regularly is there's a lot of emotional dysfunction, disconnectedness, so people feel like it doesn't really matter where they go, and they just soon live there.
Right.
I know that's how Sam feels, the guy that I was talking about. Like he's like, I just assumed because he feels like he has freedom on the street. It's interesting, but that's how he feels.
Right. Well, I think everybody has the right to be where they want to be. And the problem is that for people who have roofs over their heads and want to stay there, they can't because there's, there's so many issues from work, lack of minimum wage being, living wage. And $15 is not living wage. I mean, it's just not when you figure in taxes. It's still not living wage. $20 is living wage. And I get that hurts, small companies to have everybody at $20 an hour. But how do we, the bigger questions are, how do we continue? Why would we continue going this way? And I think the answer to that is because some people are expendable, and the people who are most expendable are the poor among us. And it's always been that way. And the way that people deal with that, the way that people who aren't poor deal with that, is once a year around the holidays, they give to some, some group called, whether it's the Red Cross or not the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and drop a quarter in a bucket or whatever, and they feel better. And it's nothing. That I would be happier if people who, felt like all they wanted to do is give dollars to some organization that never gets to the people. Instead of doing that, why not just go go buy some socks, go, whatever you do, get something warm and go meet somebody on the street and say hello and humanize them. Humanize yourself in the experience and make one person feel humanized. Do that. If you're going to do one thing in the entire year, make it count. Don't just drop a quarter in a bucket.
Well, I think that speaks to the idea that we're really kind of afraid of them. Don't you think? A lot of people are really afraid of the houseless because they're not clean, they're not kempt. Many of them do have obvious, even if they seem like they're not mentally disabled, people, and then there's this other thing too, is that a lot of the houseless people don't want to engage with you because they're afraid you're going to mess up their gig. Because it's so precarious, they live on such a thin line of being able to make things work, organizing how you're going to live your life.
I've never once in all the years that I've been going out to meet houseless people had an experience where I say to somebody, hey, how you doing today? That they do not want to talk to me or, engage. I've never experienced that.
How long have you been doing this activism?
Well, for the houseless, pretty hardcore for 3 years, and off and on, just, but as, trying to really change the system, 3 years.
And how have you made any real major impacts? Have you guys really been able to create a systematic change inside of Portland and their attitude towards people?
To an extent. And the first issue that we had when people were dying last winter here, we had 7 people die on the street, was that if I hadn't done the extreme activism that I did by interrupting city council every single week, sometimes with coffins, sometimes with multiple coffins, sometimes with, whatever it was, whatever it took, to bring the attention to the fact that we have people suffering and dying on our streets, no one, and I know this, no one would have known about it. So the impact from having activists shut down city council week after week made the conversation have to happen. And that was our first goal, and we succeeded in that goal. So the second thing, then we needed a new goal. Okay, now we're talking about it. While we're talking about it, let's make sure right away, which is what we had done, was let's give answers to the mayor, so that if the media says to us, well, what do you want the mayor to do about it? We're like, well, we've already given him the what to do about it. He has that, and we were able to give the list of what he needs to do about it. So we supplied the conversation and the answer. And from that point on, it became, what will they do about it, and will they do anything about it? And what they chose to do last year was nothing. They did nothing, absolutely nothing. They said that they did a lot of things. Here's a houseless person right here, and I'm going to wave. So, and acknowledge that he exists, you know. So anyway, God, it's so sad. It's raining really hard here. His tent is right here on the corner. I'm on Division and the off-ramp of 205. The whole corner here, there's a big overpass. There's a lot of people under here. This area gets swept all the time. And that was a very old man.
And by swept, you mean the police make people leave there?
The police come, yes, absolutely. Hold on one second. I'm going to say hi to him. Hey, man, how you doing? How are you doing?
So there you go.
You dry?
This is her talking to people, folks.
You're not dry? You know what? I'm gonna try to get back
For
out
real
here. I've got
people.
some socks, and I'm gonna go bring some socks back over your way. Okay?
And
It's not gonna be
socks.
for a few hours. All right.
Socks are always handy. Socks
All
and
right,
food.
man.
Food matters
You
too.
take care, okay? Do you have any food?
I know.
Do you
See,
have
that's
food?
what she's asking is about food. I know for
You got some
myself,
food?
that's
Okay.
what I do. There's people that here in
So
Eugene,
I got.
Oregon.
Okay.
I
I'm
bring
gonna
them
get you hooked up.
food. I do give them money, but I mostly bring
Okay,
them
man.
food. They are very, very grateful for that.
All right.
So
All right. I'm gonna send some people out to you too. Okay, with
Sure.
blankets.
this is total. This is exactly how easy it is to talk to people, folks.
What's that?
So
You're Pastor Pops. All right.
I'm
man.
looking this out. The homeless shelter directly in Portland,
All right.
Oregon.
Pastor Pops, you take care. Okay. All right. Okay. You too. Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, we heard
I'm
you.
going to send some people who live.
I know.
So I'm going to send some people who live out this way in Portland over here with blankets, because he told me very specifically he and his wife are freezing. They need blankets, and he's got food. So okay, so we'll get some blankets out here today, and I'm sure food will come with it. So we have a network here, and that's what we worked hard to do. That's the other thing that we did last year. The network was so incredible.
How many people are involved in the network?
Well, I don't know everybody, but I know a lot of people, and I would say that, there were at least, 50 people, at least 50 who were constant. I'm just talking about constant, and there were at least a constant 50, and then people I don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if it was as high as 50. But it was somewhere around there. And we were so busy all the time. Friends of mine were doing food drops. So they would make sandwiches and soups and get coffee and deliver that. I was doing mostly clothing drops. So we spread it all out. We made sure that all areas were covered. And, that's how it worked. Portland's big. I mean, it's a small city, but it's still big, and there's a lot to cover. So the people
For
who live
50
in outer
people, I
Southeast
should think
are-
so. I mean,
Oh,
really.
yeah.
So, but Heidi, Mimi, I want to get back to this idea about how you have affected city council. Explain,
Oh, yeah.
because in Portland, most of our listeners don't know this, but Mimi really did disrupt the city council on a regular basis. Like, really go in there and say, you cannot ignore this anymore, because last winter we had very severe winter here, lots of snow. And they're literally, like she said, we had people dying in the streets, and they were still having churches and shelters closed at 5 o'clock
Right.
in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
Instead of leaving them open, and the city saying, yeah, we're going to pick up the utility bill for the church because the church can't afford to stay open. But you met with a lot of resistance, even from the, quote, so-called progressive faction, the newly elected progressives in the Portland City Council. Explain those hoops that you had to jump over, and you're still jumping over.
Oh, yeah. They have us jumping all the time, but we try to make them jump too, because when we can make them jump, we're making progress. So, wow, they realized last year by March that we weren't going away, and they realized that they felt instead of doing the right thing, and again, to the listeners, we had given them the list of what the right thing to do was. And part of that list, just so you understand how simple the list is, part of that list was that they would make every single community center open. And they had to open. That was at the top of our list. You must open all community centers as warming shelters 24/7. So then what happened was we also said, and you can't make churches open because it's church and state, but you sure can, as the mayor, make a strong suggestion that happens. You can say, we are asking all of the churches to do your Christian duty, which is to open your doors to all the houseless that need to come inside and feed them, clothe them, and keep them warm and safe. Well, the mayor never did any of those things. So people died. So back to where we are now. So in March, we kept going, and we were relentless. We are the definition of relentless. And what ended up happening in March was they decided in a unanimous 5-0 vote that they would create an unconstitutional ruling that they could throw us out of city council indefinitely, meaning normally what the law is in Portland is they can only throw you out for 24 hours. So the next day you can come back to city council because it's a public meeting. So you can't keep somebody away from a public meeting. That's the law. What they did was they knowingly created and then voted an unconstitutional ruling that they could throw us out. They could throw me out as sort of like the ringleader for 3 months if they wanted to. And they could throw out my friend Joe for 2 weeks if they wanted to, for the same thing. They could throw us out at the same time, but give each of us different exclusions that they determined. And they knew it was unconstitutional. And when they each one voted yes for this, they each said, I know that this is unconstitutional, but I must vote yes. And that's on the record.
They verbalized those words, we know it's unconstitutional?
Yes.
They're just saying that. That means it's an impeachable offense. You can't vote for something that's unconstitutional. I mean, for real.
It's pretty wild.
And did they enforce that?
Well, they've never actually enforced it. So what happened was I went to the ACLU and they said, okay, so we can have a lawsuit against them, but we can't yet because they haven't enforced it. So what happened was everybody had to wait for the judge to comment on it because they were going against the judge's ruling. The judge had ruled a couple years before that, or maybe the year before that, in favor of my friend Joe, who is an activist with us. And that's when the ruling came down that they can only throw us out for 1 day. And so they were going against the judge's ruling. So we had to wait for the judge to make a response. And the judge's response was, well, yeah, it's incredibly bizarre that they would do this, and yet they haven't actually put it into effect yet. So there's nothing to sue them for yet. And that's how it's been ever since. So my contention was, you are holding this hammer up over my head. It's like, if I misbehave, you can throw me out for, 3 months. And what I realized was, it was just a ploy on their part to try to get us to behave, and that's in quotes. And not on their part. On their part, it's not in quotes. And so we were like, oh, this is meaningless because they're never going to do it, And because of that, we are now, we're back in full action. All they can do is throw us out.
So that fascinates me as a technicality, though, here. So they passed a law that they admitted was unconstitutional. The judge said yes,
Yes.
it's unconstitutional.
It's a ruling. It's not a
ruling.
Law,
okay,
council,
it's a ruling.
Yeah.
Now, has anybody submitted any legislation to revoke that unconstitutional law? And force them to vote against it? That's what I'd do, is I'd submit something to force them to vote against a revocation of, and then when they vote against it, because leaving it on the books is exactly what you said, is a threat. It's a tacit threat. That is an unconstitutional tacit threat.
Exactly.
And that's
exactly. And,
that's kind of the thing. They're waiting to use it at the right time, to spring out at you. But that's completely that's so abusive. Like, that's an abuse of the law that ought to be overruled and overturned. I wouldn't just, if it was me, I would not leave that book on the law. I would seriously go after it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot. Like right now our issue. Hold on.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. You know why it's on the books? Because they know you don't have time to deal with it. Because just making that an issue takes you off, and in fact that's part of the ploy of this abuse, is if you want to really revoke that unconstitutional law, it's going to take your energy off of the issue of helping the houseless. For real.
Right.
Because there's only so many of you. There's a very small group of people out of 650,000 people. There's 50 people activating,
right,
in this arena.
That's right. Activated. Mm-hmm.
And that's really what it's really all about. And, my guess is, for me, every time I see a person who's houseless, I always do tell them, make sure you keep out of the rain. For me, that's a huge issue about the environmental exposure that they have, not being in a home, because protecting yourself from the effects of radiation and radioactive contamination, a lot of it is just staying out of its way.
And part of it, too, is that everybody's immune system is so compromised being outside just because everybody's sick all the time.
Yeah.
So you have that on top of being vulnerable to just the conditions of being outside. We had one of the largest fires this year. Well, we did, close to Portland, in Portland, really. The Eagle Creek fire was massive, and it rained ash. And
wow.
We were told, stay inside. What are you telling the houseless when that's happening?
Right.
They can't stay inside.
Exactly. And their numbers actually probably don't even get counted. This is the interesting thing. The way we treat people who are houseless in our country is, honestly, people need to really rethink how we're treating people, because the time is coming up when the economy is going to collapse. We're going to see a surge again in houseless people who are finding themselves unable to make ends meet and having to figure out a different way to live. I know that people are touting this economy as if it's doing well, but it's on the precipice of collapse. So it's
that's right. It's a facade right now, right?
Yes, it is. It's kind of like what goes on with the city council in Portland. I've been following it on your Facebook page, and the mayor acts like everything's perfectly fine. It's fine here. What are you guys complaining about? We're doing the best that we can. We're a great progressive city, but I'll tell you the truth. My experience in Portland is, I don't particularly find it to be totally progressive myself personally. People have this idea.
It's a facade. It's not progressive at all. Because as soon as you start talking about houseless people, that's when everybody's true colors come out. If you want to know how progressive a place is, look at how many houseless people live in that city.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the real thing. If you're a progressive city, you don't have houseless people.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
It's really unbelievable that in our country that we just sort of accept it, that we have just lots of people living outside on the streets, sleeping in doorways. Kids go to school without breakfast, without lunch, without a safe place to sleep at night. Yeah. There's a lot of children who, people don't recognize this, but there are a lot of children without homes, without a house, barely hanging on their parents or barely making it. And they're not really making it. And the way we deal with people in this country who are on the edge is, in my view, quite inhumane. It's like I said, we're assets. They view us as assets on a balance sheet, literally. We really are assets on a balance sheet. And, our personal life experience and the value that these people can give to society is being lost. That's the sad part. A lot of them have really brilliant minds or have a capacity to, make our communities better, and yet they're caught up in just subsistence living and just getting by and making ends meet. So what is the plan for this winter in Portland? I mean, have you guys made any really big progress in terms of keeping homeless, shelters open, churches open, warming centers?
Well, what we know so far, and none of it's been, really put into motion yet, so it's unclear. There's another building that's been opened up to house, I think it's 75 vets. So if you're a veteran, you can stay there. However, you need to make an appointment, like a reservation. And it's like, what does that even mean to somebody out on the street, right? You need to make a reservation. Like, as though it's the Four Seasons. And I'm serious when I say that. And I wrote to the mayor when that came out. And I said, I understand that you can only hold 75 people in this building. That's fine. That's, we have limits on, for safety. But no, you don't get to make reservations. You allow 75 people who show up to be there, because by doing that, you're saying that you're only choosing to help those veterans you're making a distinction, and you're only willing to help the veterans who are already receiving help somehow, which is how they knew about it, to make a reservation in the first place. So the veterans who are even worse off, this is like going from, worse to worst, can't get those services. So it's already extremely flawed. And will 75 veterans even know about this place to even show up? So my guess is that there won't be 75 veterans there because people won't know about it. And if I sound angry and appalled and shocked, I am. I cannot be calm when I hear these things. If you're going to make a plan, make a real one. And so this is more of the same, we're going to pretend we're doing something and we're not really doing anything. And yet, there's so much that can be done that is real. And again,
what's their contingency plan? Let's say, okay, so they
don't have one. They don't have
if 75 beds are available and 47 people or 40 people make reservations, that's 35 beds left over. Are they going to open that place up for people who just knock on their doors?
Lonnie, that's the question. That's exactly the question.
I mean, because what happens if people don't make the reservation? Then you have a shelter that's available, and are you going to only keep it to veterans? Or are you going to turn away a mother with her child, or a pregnant woman, or an old man who can barely walk?
Well, right. This place is specifically for men, and that's okay. That's okay that it is. But you're right. I understand what you're saying regarding, what if more men show up to to use those cots? You're going to turn them away? Right.
If it's open and available.
Right.
I mean, that's
right.
Even almost more offensive. You know what I mean? Like, that's
the whole thing. It is, Lonnie, that's the perfect word. It's offensive. And the other thing that I've said in City Council to this plan is, how are you mobilizing the word out on the street? What is that plan? Do you have flyers that you're handing out to people to give them the address in writing and a phone number, if they can manage a phone, to find a phone to use, but at least the address? Because if that mobilization isn't happening, which it is not, then we're back to where we were last year, where most of the people who are on the streets, that core of people like me going out there, we knew this. They did not know where the shelters were. There were so few shelters that, they had no idea, and then they couldn't get there. So we were giving rides to people to get them to shelters. And this is the job of the city. This should be the job of the city. And, it's the motto of Portland is the city that works, which is the most ironic thing.
Well, I will say this, as coming from a family with people who have been homeless. I have had family members my sister who died at 50 was homeless. And she honestly very rarely wanted my help, wanted any of our help, had some of her own very issues. As I say, she died at 50. She was very young from her habits, from her medical condition. But part of what happens, this is what I've noticed, is you ask them to do simple things like just make a phone call or go do this, and they're in such a state of, I don't know if it's weakness or emotional instability, that they just can't, like something like making a phone call to make a reservation, even if they had a cell phone, which many of them do not. Let's say they had a cell phone. Many of them can't figure out, like, the phone line will be busy or someone will say, put you on hold, and they're like, I can't do this. And then, it just becomes this big. This is why we need to reach out with humanity towards people who are struggling on the street, because they could be us. They are us. They're our family members. They're people that have come through our lives. And it is really an inhumane position to just blame it's kind of like victim blaming, for saying it's your fault, you're out there. Now, many of them, like my sister, for example, she resisted getting help. And frankly, it wasn't until like the last, 8 or 9 years of her life where things got very difficult, where she started accepting help, because it was super difficult. She was in a place where she had to get help. And sometimes that's all that matters, is you have to let people come, and without judgment, let them have, like Sam, it hurt me when I first realized that Sam wants to stay on the street. But you know what? I have to allow that for him, because that's his point of dignity. He's not going to be boxed in his words. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean he doesn't deserve help. It doesn't mean he doesn't deserve warm blankets, people reaching out to him with food, giving him a hug. You know what I mean? Like, actually being humane with people. We do not have to fit everybody into one box, but it does matter how we come together. And I applaud your efforts, because really, what I've seen as an outsider, because I don't live in Portland, is that it doesn't matter who's gotten on the city council, progressive, Republican, they all click their heels and say Sig Heil and step in tune to us against them.
They do. Yep.
It's been interesting to watch it, but this is often, in fact, this is how the system feeds on itself. People get into government with high ideals and they get the insider story of, we're not going to buck the system. There's no way you can do it. So then they start sliding in on the side of the oppressor, and they become a unified voice instead of being willing to stand up and stick out and say, wait a minute, I'm not going along with this. And when that does happen, as Rob Handy, who was a commissioner here in Eugene, Oregon, he did stand up against buck up the system. And you know what happened? Somebody came up with some fake charges about how he ran his campaign. He got ridiculed. They didn't allow him out on committees. They would have committee meetings without him because they knew what he was going to say. There's a lot of small internal illegal things that happened. After just one term, he gave up and walked away. Now, he's a really awesome commissioner. He understood a lot of the issues, and yet the system eats people alive. And I think going into it, those of us who have chosen to really decide that this government is our government and we're going to take a handle in it, we actually have to bolster ourselves and recognize that that is exactly the system of the oppressor. And we have to just be willing to accept it and let it roll off your back and not get disheartened.
Right. Well, back to how you started the show, which was about, doing local activism, I also encourage people to check out your neighborhood association. Our neighborhood association in St. John's, Portland, is one of the most corrupt neighborhood associations I have ever been privy to witnessing. And they've done everything that they can in the last, which was just a month ago. It was in October. They did everything they could to make sure that that my friend and activist Star and myself were not going to be allowed on the board. And because we're activists and because we work for the houseless. And the thought of us being on the board and allowing a houseless village into the area of St. John's where we live was so appalling and frightening to, the people on the board, because, oh my God, their housing prices would go down. That they messed with the vote, they lied, they withheld, they did everything illegally, and we are still going through actions on fighting this. But that's what I mean. I mean, how much more local can you get? Well, you can take it one step more local, which is to go directly to the people. And those people that we're talking about today on the show are the people out on the street. So I'm requesting that every one of you listening, wherever you are, that you, unless you're in Florida and it's hot, that you take a blanket with you in your car, that you take clean, warm socks. And when you see people out on the street, ask them. Don't tell them. Ask them if they are in need of a blanket or clean, warm socks. And if they are, give it to them. Just carry these things with you in your car. It's really easy. It's the most direct action you can do. It's the
That's
most
a great
effective,
idea.
It's the most beneficial.
That's a great idea. I usually carry around food. Because last summer I didn't.
Yeah.
I actually had a bunch of food in my kitchen, and I was cleaning out my kitchen, and I didn't want it to go bad, so I put it in a bag, and I brought it down to a guy who I know sits on the corner all the time. Oh, my God, tears welled up in his eyes. He's like, you have no idea how much this means to me. And so I actually do actually do that on a regular basis, where I'll carry around food with me and just ask them if they'd like it. And that is actually a big point, is to ask them instead of just tell them what do they need. But that requires that we have the courage to engage people who, in our minds look scary, in our minds look threatening. And we have to break that barrier of being willing to talk to people who really are vulnerable. They're standing out on the street begging for money. You know what I mean? A lot of these people that we reach out to doesn't mean that they're bad people. That's their way of making it through life at this point in their life. And frankly, many of them, like I talked to a guy who has 2 degrees from the University of Oregon. He's got 2 degrees. Right. His life fell apart, his emotions, all this stuff. He just couldn't take it. He's ended up on the street. He's been there now 5 years. I'm like, wow, that was an interesting little window. So I don't know. You know what? Maybe it's we have less than a minute left. Oh my gosh, this has gone by so quickly.
That's a good show, Lonnie.
Thank you, Mimi, for your activism. Thank you for giving us a window into how we can make an effect in our own communities, and how easy it is for us to reach out to our fellow human beings and make a difference in their lives. So I really appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Thank you, and a big thanks to people listening, and thanks for getting activated.
Yeah. Well, you guys put your courage feet on. I guess I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care.